before we get underway. So first one is just to point this out, and it's linked in the code lab that I told you to work on the challenge from the other day. So if you go to, what was it? We were on 1.2 part A. One of the things it asks you in the coding challenge is to rename the package, rename the project. Um, a few of the different assignments in here, the labs and coding challenges, will ask you to do a rename of your project, make a new version of it. So this is kind of something you want to know how to do, and you'll have to probably refer back to it at least the first few times you do it. So I just linked the instructions of where this is in the Git book. It's actually under the instructions to get it, and it kind of mentions it here. Look under Appendix Utilities. So this is kind of at the end of the book. If you go through here, it'll give you instructions of how to copy and rename the project. So there's a few things you have to do. You start by kind of copying the folder, then you have to rename the package. So it'll give you kind of instructions of how to do that. And then there's also two changes you have to make, one in the Gradle file and one in the manifest, if you're going to make a variant of that application. So definitely look up that if you haven't looked it up already for the coding challenge from yesterday, and go through that. Did anybody run into any difficulties with the coding challenge?
Yeah, I did. One of them was with getting the tablet view into landscape. There was no so there's the two icons on the screen with the blue, and then I don't know what that's called, but the one that rotates where it says create landscape view, that option was not there. And what I ended up doing to solve it, which is probably not the right way, or there's probably an easier way, is copying the layout for the tablet and then renaming the file the same except for -land. It took me over an hour to figure that out.
So the way you want to do that generally, let me pull up Android Studio. First of all, those buttons won't appear if those files already exist. And the other thing is that the tablet, that tablet variant is generally used for both landscape and portrait. You can actually create four where you have one for portrait tablets and landscape tablets, but typically you're just going to create one variant for tablets. So in order to kind of get that button here, if you have the tablet variant pulled up, and then pull this in here, it kind of depends on which version you have pulled up. So if I have the tablet version pulled out, it won't give me, that's probably the case where you're not getting the option to create a landscape version. But if I go back to the phone's version, that's where you should be able to get the create landscape. I think you have to start from the phone's version to get that. Now, one thing that I might point out, sometimes you create these variants by accident, and you may want to delete them. But one thing I want to point out here, let's say I go and delete this landscape. You'll notice here this pop-up comes up. Did everybody see that pop-up for deleting?
Yep.
Okay. So there's a checkbox here, and this is really, really important. So this, it says safe delete, is really a misnomer. What this does is, if you have that box checked, it will also delete potentially or update any resources that are connected to it. And one of the things that means is, if you have that box checked, watch what happens. So I'm going to have that box checked, which I believe it's checked by default. And notice it says delete alternate resource files from your for other configurations. This pop-up actually didn't used to come up, but everybody see that pop-up? Any guesses as to what that means?
Maybe it's talking about configurations like
Mhm.
on different devices potentially, like
Okay.
our landscape
Mhm.
versus our tablet versus
Right.
our phone style.
So I have three configurations here. So if I click yes on that, watch what happens over here. It says blah 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 blah. Usage is not safe delete. So you can say go ahead and delete anyway. And where did all my layouts go? Right, they're all gone.
Yep, it's all deleted. I learned that one the hard way.
So you do have to be very careful with that. Anytime you have alternatives, it's very easy to accidentally delete the whole group, and that can mean losing a whole lot of work. So what you want to do instead, when I hit delete, I think what I want to do is just hit no here, delete alternative ones, and we're going to say delete anyway. And that's kind of your catch, is you have to hit no on that dialog. So now that I have that, so I've got a tablet variant and a phone variant, but I don't have a landscape variant in there. I see the landscape. I see the option here. Create landscape variation.
Right, but what? How would you get a tablet to do landscape view? It wouldn't work for me. All it did is rotate the screen 90 degrees, and that ain't gonna work. You know, you got to have something that rotates. So you have to almost have 4 views, yeah.
Actually, usually you can get away with 3. Usually because tablets are big enough, a 7-inch and a 10-inch tablet's usually big enough that you can usually use the same layout for landscape and portrait.
Okay, so the answer is that you just don't have one. You could do it, but you don't have
You
to.
could
There's no
do it.
functionality.
You could do it, but you generally don't need to. If you do want to do that, you actually have to kind of do it the long way. So if you're going to make a specific version, that 4th version, let me go back to what I had here, which are the 3 versions. What you actually have to go do is right click on layout and say new layout resource file. So you basically create a new layout, and you have to give it the same name as all of the ones you already have.
It just won't work if you don't call it the same name.
Correct. Yeah. So one of the catches is that's those buttons both there are basically shortcuts. They're shortcuts for this more complicated dialogue because we do that often enough. So in here you can do all of that. So for instance, we want to say we want it both to be tablet and to be landscape. Both of those things have to be true for this layout. I want to go, first of all, you notice there's a few different things: smallest screen width, screen width, screen width. If you remember yesterday, I said the SW here stands for smallest screen width, which is why, if I want to do that, I want to create that version, right? So small screen width, I'm going to hit the right arrows to pull it in, and I need to specify it as 600 is the minimum. And you can actually see now it's generated that qualifier, SW6dB. Does everybody see that?
That's essentially the same thing as what you have there so far.
Right, that's the same thing.
So
what I can then do is I can add this dialog lets me add some of those additional constraints. So in here I can also specify that the orientation is landscape. So I can specify both of those things, and you can kind of see where it's going to put it. Layout, SW600 land. And actually, as it turns out, the order of those does matter. They have to be in a specific order as far as Android's concerned, which is the other reason to use this dialog rather than manipulating a file system directly. But that'll build it out for you. So now that I have that, I'll have an empty layout, and it's both of those things. Do you see that? Again, normally you don't need to do this.
How would you get the you just did that and hit OK. How would you configure it afterwards? Or let's say you wanted to change the third one there to
So one thing to notice, first of all, if I change the orientation now, you see how it's got this arrow? So it's actually going to be switching between my portrait tablet and my landscape tablet layouts. But you'll notice that this layout is empty, right? This layout is empty, which means there's a little bit of extra work I have to put in there. Okay. So everybody with me so far on that, the layout switching kind of thing? So what I do then, if I want to bring my layout over, is I'm actually going to go into this one and do it through the code view. This is actually easier to do through code. I just take all the code that's in here, boop, 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 boop. Copy it and paste it over here. And so they should basically be at the same starting point. Now, there is a problem in here, and you'll notice that it's kind of highlighting this app in red, the app colon. So that's because app colon is not defined over here. So this is kind of an XML thing that it's worth knowing about. You see Android colon, app colon. That prefix there is what we call a namespace in XML. So you have to define those namespaces kind of at the root of the document. So up here you can see that it says XML namespace. That's what the NS is short for. XML namespace Android, and it points at this URL. So that's what tells it what to do with the Android colon. The problem is it doesn't know what to do with app colon. So if I want to bring that over, I also have to bring over the namespace for app, which is here, back in that other file. So I can just add that in. It's now going to be happy with the app colon, but you'll still notice that it's having a problem with tools. So I also need to bring that namespace over and define it in this file. So as it turns out, I've got 3 namespaces defined: Android, app, and tools. Most of your files will end up having those 3 namespaces, and they do actually need to be defined exactly that way. There's not flexibility to try and use your own name. It does need to be those, and it does need to be those URLs. But those, when you start a new file, it will only have the Android one in it. Cool?
Yeah. Well, what would be wrong with just going into Explorer, copying that third layout there of the tablet, and then renaming the folder .land, just as it is there?
It's not .land. It's not
what?
.land.
Oh, I mean -land.
Yeah.
It worked for me.
As long as you get the order right. The problem is that there's a defined order in Android where things have to be. So like if you do land-SW600DP, it will be in the wrong. It won't read it. It'll just ignore it completely.
So the only thing that makes it landscape then is the folder name that it's in.
Yes, it's the folder name. It's the folder name.
That wow. I mean, I accept that, but that to me doesn't have logic. You think that would be like built right into the XML file? Whatever.
Yeah.
I mean,
that is how all of the resource files in Android are organized. It's by the folder name. That's everything in Android has been done that way, and it's been done that way since Android 1.0. But yeah, it's just the only difference there is it's this name. It's in this folder name. It's not the difference of the file. It's the difference of the folder that determines what it's used for. But I would strongly recommend doing that, using those add new resource buttons instead of trying to like copy and paste and manipulate the files directly.
Yeah. Okay. How would you go back
with problems
after you create that one?
Yeah.
You had 2 qualifiers on creating the resource file. It was the orientation and then what was it? The screen width. how do you go back and alter? Like, let's say you change your mind. You want it to be SW700.
Right.
So how would you do that?
Yeah, if I decide this was the wrong place, I don't know that there's an easy way to do that, unfortunately. The best way that I have to do that is to actually go to the file and rename the folder and manipulate the only way I know to do that is to manipulate the folder directly, which is really a pain.
F2, type it in, land. I mean, isn't that all there is?
Well, the problem is, remember, it's not part of the file name. So if I try to rename the file, refactor rename, you'll notice that I'm actually just the folder name's not in there, right? Because this is just the name of the file. Now there is an option in there for refactor move file, and I could use that. Actually, that would work. So I could move the file to another folder. Say go in here and move it if I know that I want it to be that way. And now it's at 700 DP.
Okay, all right. I just went right into the Windows Explorer outside of the program and created the new folder and copied and pasted the one from the original in there.
Yeah, variants in Android have always been a pain in the butt. There's definitely a reason for them being there, and there's a lot of problems I could never have fixed without or addressed without them. But they can be really a pain in the butt to kind of work with in a lot of ways. From accidentally deleting everything to like just trying to track all the different variants you have and things like that. So, and that's part of why I say if you can just have one version of the resource, then just have one version of the resource. That's always the easiest option, is to avoid variants in the first place. But there are places like this where the layout just doesn't work or isn't optimal on all screen sizes. So you have to create a different version.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Anybody, does that answer any questions for everybody else here? Am I talking to a wall? Okay. Other notes, you will have, I did post this on Discord, you may have already seen it. I've got kind of a project in the works to try and give you some more, try to give me notifications anytime you push up code and try to help with me tracking attendance and things like that. So you will probably get an email today if I've got everything right. You should be getting an email on your Inside Ranken when you push up your code today that will include a little bit of information, such as, when did you create the repo, last pushed it, how many commits do you have on, how much data is in there. This diagram that you're seeing here is actually showing, what days have you committed and not. So, for instance, this would show that I've committed the last 3 days, and this last one being today. There's a summary of the commits that you just pushed, as well as this indicator was one of the things I'd like you to look at once you get your code pushed up, because I'm trying to kind of indicate, well, what files have you uploaded, what's there and what's not there. So that helps me kind of track status of, are you missing any files or things like that. Cool.
Sweet.
So that's, again, a work in process. I've been working on that for a few weeks to try and get it to a good place, but we'll see that helps. Long term, I'd like to have that do some automated testing on your code every time you push it up. It's not doing that yet, but that way you can kind of get some quicker feedback than me having to kind of grade the whole thing. So, okay, so that's where that fits in. So our plan today is in terms of schedule. Remember, we just finished up with 1.2 yesterday. We'll go through 1.3 today and 1.4 tomorrow. So I'm going to pull up this here.
I'm going to switch over
my desktop real fast.
Yeah, go for it. I think I am the videos here are pretty short today. I think there's only about 15, 16 minutes, but I think I'm going to go ahead and just go through the slides because there are a few things I'd like to maybe pick out or talk about. And the slides today are pretty short.
What did you say?
I'm just going to go through the slides here instead of the videos today.
Okay.
So if you're looking on Perusal, you'll see them right underneath the video. They'll be listed here 1.1c. You can see text and scrolling views slides. So that's what I'm going through now.
Because one of the reasons that these slides are kind of old is because apps are kind of on the way out, and it's web apps that are taking their place.
I wouldn't say that. The problem is the Google's changed some major things in the last 2-3 years. So those videos were literally just like, if you look at the date on those videos, I believe they're 2017, 2018. There's just some major changes that Android's decided to take in the last 5 years. Many of them for good reasons. Unfortunately, it's meant that those changes have made a drastic impact on, have just had a drastic impact on any sort of book or training material related to it. One of those we kind of ran into yesterday in the fact that relative layout used to be the default, the go-to, and now constraint layout is the go-to. So that changes everything in terms of making layouts. There's also the support libraries, which we'll talk about tomorrow, have been replaced by something called Jetpack. Those two things alone means that a lot of documentation that's just 2 or 3 years old is already significantly out of date. Cool. So
yeah,
that's kind of the unfortunate reality. Corey, did you get switched over?
Yeah, I'm all good.
Okay. So what we kind of talked about yesterday, we talked about a few components when we did our practical. We went through and we used some text, we used text view, we used some buttons, we looked at kind of the click event, and we used the constraint layout. So we're going to kind of introduce two more controls today or talk about them more deeply. One is we're going to talk about the text view, and the other one is we're going to talk about the scroll view, which you can use to kind of fit more things onto the screen and provide a vertical scroll bar. So that's what we're going to do. And to give you some kind of orientation of where we're going, if you're looking at the labs, let me jump over to the lab for today, just so you can see where we're going. So the lab for today is going to be kind of a, at least the beginnings of an article reader. So we're going to have kind of a header here. We have a few different headers, and then putting some text in there, and that text will be scrollable. So that's our end goal of what we're going to be building today. And so a lot of the stuff on the slides is kind of in furtherance of that goal. So that's really all we're going to talk about today. Text view, scroll view. So it'd be pretty simple, should be pretty short. So text view we've kind of got an introduction to already. Text view you can kind of think as a label in some sense. At least that's the text view control itself. The catch is that with the way that remember we mentioned class hierarchies yesterday, is kind of the hierarchy of the classes or the inheritance relationships in Java. The way that the hierarchy is for controls in Android is weird. And I don't think that they should have done it the way that they did, but they did. So a text view you can kind of think as a label, and I would expect any subclass of text view to behave as a label. But that is not actually the truth. The reality is text view itself looks like a label, looks like text that you can look at and read, but you can't edit. In reality, text view is anything that displays text or edits text, because actually text boxes, places where you enter text or edit text, are actually subclasses of text view, which is maybe not what I would expect. So in terms of a inheritance relationship, a text field is a text view. And buttons are also text views. So just because something is, say class text view, that doesn't actually mean that it's necessarily a label or that it's read only. Everybody kind of follow with that?
Yep.
So let me pop over here and do a quick graph of where that looks, because there's a few classes in there that you want to know about. So I'm going to create a new Jamboard. So if we're looking at kind of the inheritance hierarchy of things, we know in Java that everything descends from object, and so that's kind of always at the root. Beneath that we have view. View is basically anything that can appear on screen, specifically anything that can appear within an activity. And so underneath there, that kind of branches a few different ways. So for instance, we've got view groups. A view group is anything that can contain other views. And so there's kind of a hierarchy here. So a view is anything that can contain other views, but they're also considered views. Then underneath here, we've got text view. There are other classes that are views as well, and we'll get to them later. But kind of looking at the ones you know about so far, and kind of in the short term. So we've got a text view. Text view is anything that has text on. So text view here, that's basically treated as a label. There's what's called an edit text. Edit text is a subclass of text view. And you've also got button. Button, as it turns out, is also a subclass of text view, because both of these have text. Okay. So that's kind of their inheritance hierarchy. If I want to put some of the layouts in here, we might put in linear layout. And so I'm going to put that over here. That would be a view group. And I might also put in constraint layout, which is the big one that we used yesterday. So all of the different layouts are actually view groups. Okay, so that's the kind of the class hierarchy of the stuff that we've touched so far. Any questions on that yet? Does that make sense? Everybody follow what I mean by that? So text view is a label. This is basically a text field where you can type in text. You've got buttons. The other one that we'll talk about today is going to be scroll view. And that fits in over here because it is actually a subclass of view group. And by that, it means that you can put controls inside of a scroll view. Okay, so that's kind of the hierarchy that we've seen so far. Okay. This is the one that gets really weird very quickly, because I would not expect edit text to be text views or button to be text views, because effectively you're saying buttons are labels, but that is what it is. So going back to the slides, so we talked about text view is the subclass of text view is subclass of view, and you can either have single line of text or multiple lines of text, which is what we'll use it to do today, is multiple lines of text. What we used it yesterday for just the single, like the number displaying the count. Edit text we'll be talking about in future lessons. We'll get more into that in Unit 2, for actually putting in text boxes where you can have the user type in data. And then all of those are really controlled with a lot of the layout attributes, which some of which we've seen already. So we've seen like the width and the height. We've seen how to set some of the constraints. All of those are controlled by that. You can set anytime you're working with a text view or anything that's descendant from that, you always have two options. You can either set the text that appears there, you can set it statically, you can set it in the XML, or you can change it in the Java code, both of which we did yesterday, because remember the buttons, we gave it some hard-coded, some static text in the views, in the XML, but then we were dynamically changing that count with our Java code.
Hey, Mr. Smith, quick question. Yeah. Edit text and an input box.
Yes. Same thing.
Are those okay?
Same
All
thing.
right.
Same thing. An input box is an edit text. It's just that's the name of the class and the name of the tag you use. So an input box is called an edit text in the Java world, in the Android world. So if we're putting text into a text view, we actually do have limited HTML support. So you can actually put a little bit of styling on anything you put into a text view. So for instance, we can use the B tag, the bold tag, to make things bold, or we can use the I tag to make things italic. But it's not full and complete HTML. It's very, very limited. So there's B, there's I, and there's anchor. I think the anchor tag is supported out of the box. I feel like underline or U is supported out of the box, but those are the only 4 tags that you really get. So that means you can't do things like div or any CSS. You can't change font sizes. A lot of those things are not built in as being supported. Now, there are ways to extend the syntax and be able to do some more formatting with labels, more than just those tags, but that's beyond the scope of what we'll cover in this course. So in general, if we're having a string resource, generally speaking, they're going to be treated as we're going to write them all on one line. No broken, no breaks in them typically. So that's going to be treated as one line. If you do need to break lines and have them actually, empty lines or have new lines in there, the BR tag is not supported. Again, limited HTML. What you use instead, if you do need to create a break line, you have to use the /n as we're defining the string resources. So using /n will break it down to another line. So kind of if you want to create a paragraph break, then you're going to do 2 /n's. Also, if you want to put in quotes, you do have to make sure to escape them. So / double quote / single quote. Similarly, if you want to put in like a /, you have to put //. So it's a very similar, in that sense, it's a very similar syntax to what you're used to doing in, say, C# and Java to escape your characters. So typically when we're creating text views, we'll create them in the layout file. We'll usually create them in XML. In there, we typically are going to have, say, the layout width, and that usually set through the UI. It might be match parent, it might be match constraint, it might be wrap content. The big one knowing there, and we kind of talked about this yesterday, if you set wrap content, then it's going to be whatever width the text is. So as the size of the text grows and shrinks, that means the label will grow and shrink. Similarly, if you set the height to wrap content, then it'll grow and shrink to be whatever space it needs to occupy. And then finally, Android text is how you actually set the text that you want to appear there. So common attributes that you may want to play around with, we touched some of these yesterday. So text will change what text is there. Text color changes what color it is. You can use hexadecimal values just like you're used to using in HTML. It does support those. So you can put in fixed values or constants that way. Generally speaking, though, whatever, usually when we're using text colors, it's generally better to always tie them back to a color resource, which we'll talk about later in Unit 2 about how to create some of those other color resources and how to work with styling and things like that. But that's a thing to keep in mind. It's usually better to use a resource for your colors than to hard code them. That makes it a lot easier to restyle things later on. Text appearance, there's a few constants that are available that kind of give you different levels of text. So if, for instance, it's a header in an article or a subheader, or it's just regular body text, there's some out-of-the-box text appearance classes kind of things. You can kind of think about that text appearance almost as like a class in HTML that you would apply. So that's how you kind of get things that are like an H1 or an H2 or just regular paragraph text, is you generally use the text appearance. The text size then you can use to specifically, we kind of messed with this yesterday, to make the font bigger or smaller. You're always going to specify that in SP for accessibility reasons, standing for scaled pixels. Text style is going to be normal, bold, italic, one of those three. You can actually combine them as well. And with a lot of these, you're going to just put a bar in there if it's both. So it's bold, bar, italic. And that means that it's both of those two things. The order of that doesn't actually matter. Italic, bar, bold is the same as bold, bar, italic. The typeface, there are a few options there: normal, sans, serif, monospace. I don't know that we'll do anything with the typeface, honestly, this semester, because I don't think we need it for any of the projects we're going to work on. But that option is there if, for instance, you wanted to, say, switch between a serif and a sans serif font. But if we are going to switch that, we usually don't. It's rare that we switch it on a per control basis. Usually you're switching it on the entire app. So we would be usually changing those kind of things with a theme rather than directly on the control. Line spacing extra, if you do need to create some extra space between each line, you can mess with that. I'm not too worried about that. Sometimes you may want to put links into your text that you're showing. Say this is an article. You can, as I mentioned, I do believe the anchor tag works, but oftentimes you may want to take text that's come from some source and doesn't have those tags already in it. So you can automatically turn things into links by using this auto link attribute. So if you set it to auto link web, it'll look at the text that you give it, and anything that it sees that looks like it might be a link to the internet, it will then actually turn into a clickable link rather than just normally would appear as www.rockument.com, not clickable. It'll actually make that clickable, and it'll open whatever your default browser on your app is. Similarly, you can also add in values like email, and that will say if it finds an email in there, it will automatically turn it into a mail to link. Similarly, if it finds a phone, it'll automatically turn that into a tel link, which will automatically, again, take you to your default phone app. Similarly with map, it would find any links that look like things that look like addresses and automatically turn that into a link that you can then open in your Google Maps or such. So if you set those values, you can set to any one of those or any combination. If you want to do a combination, it'll show up as a bar. So if I want to say email phone, it would be email bar phone, and then that would allow both of those. So if you do want to get links into your text, that's one way to do it, to automatically convert them.
What does all do?
What does what? All
What
would
does
turn
all do?
all of these on. So web, email, phone, and map.
It's like a catch-all then.
Yeah. So all is just a shorthand for turning them all on.
But how would you have a phone number go to your email, for example?
Well,
you know what I mean? Like if I put something that's obviously a phone number.
Right.
I mean,
if you,
how is that?
It will create a link there to your phone app, right? If it's a phone number, it'll create a link that opens your phone app with that number in it.
With
If
all?
Huh?
It's smart enough to know if you put all that it's a phone number and not an email address, for example.
Yeah, either way it's looking for it. Either way it's looking for it. If you say phone, it won't find email addresses. If you say email, it won't find phone numbers. So all says look for anything that looks like any of these four things and turn it into a link.
It only works with those four. You wouldn't be able to say like open up I don't know, like Evernote or something with it, or
Right.
another app.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you can do that kind of thing where you have a something in your app that opens up Evernote or opens up Drive or opens up the calculator. You can open other apps, but it won't automatically generate links for those. It will only automatically generate links for those four options. Now, it's worth noting that the default is that that's off. The default, the auto link is turned off. So if you want that behavior, you have to turn it on. Do be forewarned that does come with security risks, because if you're pulling in text from just anywhere, right, you don't necessarily know where those links are going. So do be careful with this auto link web, and that's why by default it's turned off, because you should only really be turning that on if you know it's data that's coming from your own company. Cool. You can create text views through code. We don't really care. We're not actually going to do anything with that, so I'm going to skip over that. As far as the scroll view goes, so scroll view, the whole point of scroll view is be able to have more stuff on the screen. So it adds a vertical scroll bar. So you might use that for things like news stories or articles, etc., which is what we're going to use it for today. It also comes in use a lot of times with just really big forms, right? So if you have maybe a registration form or some sort of user profile form that's just really long vertically for one reason or another, that is one option, is you can put the entire thing in a scroll view. One thing you don't typically want to do for accessibility reasons, typically you want to avoid nesting scroll views inside of scroll views. The problem there is just that the user interface is not really conducive to that, because then you have, well, if you have a scroll view inside of a scroll view, depending on where you swipe is going to change which scroll view it does, and that's usually not a good UX experience. So if I do add a scroll view, I'm only ever going to add one, and I typically add that to the entire screen. Cool. I usually don't nest it further down. Now, a scroll view is a view group, as I kind of mentioned with the diagram earlier, which means it can contain other views, any other view, including, well, view groups are views, so I can include layouts inside of my scroll view. So for instance, I could include a linear layout inside my scroll view or a constraint layout, but the rule is the scroll view can only have one direct child. So that typically means that your scroll view is nearly always going to have a layout directly inside of it, and most of the time that layout will be linear layout. So usually when you have a scroll view, you're usually going to find that you have a linear layout directly inside of it, but you really can use any kind of layout. They're in there. They're considered a kind of subclass of frame layout. And the rule with frame layout, remember, is they're kind of stacked. And that's kind of where you get this idea. That's part of why you can only have one, is that kind of limitation is borrowed from frame layout. But it's really more strict than that. Frame layout is okay to have multiple controls in there. Scroll view, you should only ever have one view. One side that's worth noting, anything you put in a scroll view is still in memory and live. All of those views are live, even if they're off screen. So let's say you have a screen that's 10 times the height of their current screen. Well, basically the device is still remembering all of those controls that may be in there. So it's okay for relatively simple layouts, especially if you just want to have, say, a text view, long text views that just need some space, or relatively simple forms. The problem comes if you want to do very complex layouts. It's not very efficient in terms of memory and CPU, because it's still managing everything, even if it's off screen. One of the alternatives there, which we'll talk about later, which is better when you have longer lists, is something called a recycler view. So we'll look at recycler views later on in Unit 2, because they're kind of a really important thing, especially if you want to display a list of items, whether it be a list of movies or products or things like that. There's also the option, if you want to do horizontal scrolling, you can use a horizontal scroll view. Scroll view is by itself is only vertical scrolling up and down. Horizontal can do left and right. It's worth noting that neither of these two, scroll view and horizontal scroll view, neither of those give you scrolling in both of the directions, and they actually can't be combined together to give you both. Okay, so in Android we don't do that. We don't have both horizontal and vertical scrolling that you might see or be familiar with on Windows. Cool. So
yeah.
your scrolling's always in one direction. It's either vertical or it's horizontal. And so if you're in portrait, you should pretty much always should be using the vertical scrolling. If you're in landscape, that's where sometimes it may be better to, then it can be excusable to use horizontal scroll view. But honestly, I've never written an app that made use of a horizontal scroll view, and most users generally frown on horizontal scrolling in favor of vertical scrolling. So typically what you're going to see, say we want to have some text that's relatively long, we want to add a scrolling functionality to it. If we just have the text view by itself, then it would just fall off the screen. You wouldn't be able to see the rest of the text. So if we put it inside of a scroll view, we take the text view, control it, and nest it inside of a scroll view, then you get basically a text view that you can now scroll. Now it's worth noting, and this slide is actually wrong. This right here, I don't know that I can even highlight that here, but that width should not be wrap content. Typically, if you're looking at a vertical scroll view, typically that width should actually be match parent.
Maybe you mentioned this, but if you have a text view inside of a scroll view, then you have the ability to put links and things like that in there, like that.
You get that with the text view by itself.
Oh, right. But you want the feature of a scroll view. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's the value added there. You get the best of both worlds.
This gives you something that is now scrollable, and it doesn't have to be a text view. So I can really put anything inside of the scroll view. Typically, you're going to set with any scroll view, you always want the width of it to be typically match parent or match constraint 0 dp, because you typically want that scroll view to take up the entire screen width. The other important thing to do with the scroll view, the heights matter a lot. So in this case, we're setting the scroll view to be wrap content to be as high as the content in there. This actually, if you were to take this code and use the scroll view as they show it here, wouldn't work, because to actually represent the layout that they're trying to get here, these actually would need to be both match parent. One thing that's really important, so typically those are going to be, match parent or wrap constraint to match constraint to make sure that the scroll view gets as big as it can be. Again, that's kind of situational, so we'll look at it when we get into an actual example. But it is important that whatever you put inside of the scroll view needs to have a height of wrap content. Always needs to have a height of wrap content. So that tells it that things should be as tall as it needs to be. If you set the height here to match to either match constraint, match parent, then you'll actually never be able to scroll it. If you set the height of that thing to match parent, you will never actually be able to scroll it. So you do have to pay a lot of attention to what the different heights and widths of things are. It becomes rather important. So if you just want to add text view, a single text view that you can scroll, you would do it that way. If you then want to add some additional controls that you can scroll, so for instance here we have inside the scroll view we have a linear layout, so we can have this heading here and the article text both scroll with the scroll view, versus this one you can kind of see the subheadings outside of the scroll view. So it would stay fixed in place. It would not move up and down as you move the screen, as you scroll the screen.
Would there ever be a reason to do the text view and then nest scroll view inside? No, we wouldn't do that, right?
Scroll view. Text view. Your question was about text view. Is text view? Is it a view group?
Is it a? Oh, okay.
It's not.
It's not.
So
yeah.
in order for you to put components or views inside of other views, that view has to be a view group. So views over here that aren't view groups cannot have controls inside of them. So you can't nest a scroll view inside of a text view. It's only the other way around. So I can nest a view inside of a view group. I can't nest a view inside of just a regular view. So it only works the one way. It has to be the text view inside of something else. So for instance, if we want to create a more complex, here we have a scroll view on the outside. Linear layout is going to then put things in a vertical orientation. So we'd have an image at the top. Beneath that, we have a button, and then we have a text view. So we can put some stuff in there.
All right, so it's kind of like a view group, if you will. It's kind of like a grocery bag, and the other stuff is like products. Right. Like you can put an apple in a bag, but you can't put a bag in an apple. Something like that.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, correct. Your view groups are basically shopping bags, and then your views are your individual items. So yeah, if I can put as many oranges in my bag as I want, but I can't put like a bag inside of my orange. And you can also nest bags inside of bags. So I could have a bag of oranges and a bag of apples, and I could put both of those into a larger bag. That's okay. You just can't put the individual objects inside of. You can't have bags inside of individual objects unless they're bags. So that's the end of the theory here for the slides, and so we'll jump into the code labs here and start building out this particular app today.
All right, so let's get going. And so we're gonna kind of work through and build this application here. Is kind of our goal for the rest of the session here. So I'm going to pull up Android Studio. Actually, want to close that project. Okay. So we're going to create a brand new project. And if we kind of look at task 1, it's going to give us, is it task 1? Yeah, there it is. So task 1, if you scroll down a little bit, you're going to see what it says the application name should be, right? So the application name should be scrolling text. So we're going to create that in Android Studio. So I'm going to create a new project, empty activity, and we're going to call it scrolling and remember that you want to make sure that it goes into the right folder. So the right folder today would be 1.3 because it's lesson 1.3. So I'm going to go ahead and take that a snippet so we have it. And paste that here. So that's going to be the name of the project that we're going to create today, is scrolling text under 1.3. Okay. Once you get to the designer here, give people a chance to create the project. Who am I waiting on? Okay. Sheridan, how are you coming along? Trying to say anything, Sheridan, your mic's not coming through. I don't know why. Okay, cool. That's why I wanted to wait. Okay, so we've got the designer pulled up. And just like yesterday, before I actually get going, I'm going to make a few changes. So I'm going to turn on the system UI so I can see that. And I'm also going to set the default margins of 8. So I'm going to do both of those two things before I get started. So the next thing I want to do is I'm going to start by looking at, what happens if we just have a text view by itself. So we can play around with that a little bit just to see what happens if you don't put a scroll view in there. So first thing I'm going to do is actually delete all of the constraints. There we go. I'm going to delete all the constraints, and I'm just going to anchor it to the top left corner. Okay, so in this case, the width and height of this text view is actually, it's set to, there it is. So I've got selected, so it's set to wrap content and wrap content. So it's only going to be, in theory, as big as the text is that I give it. Okay. So we want to kind of see first, before we put all these things in place, maybe what happens if I just put a bunch of text in there, but I don't use a scroll view. So in here, I'm going to go look for a lorem ipsum generator and get some lorem ipsum text that I can put in there. And so let's say, how many paragraphs? I want 5 paragraphs. That's probably good enough to start with. I'm going to link this here for anybody that wants to use the same tool. But I'm just going to have it generate 5 paragraphs of lorem ipsum. Now, typically you have the option of putting text directly into here. Like I could actually paste all of that directly into this text field right here, and that would work. The problem is if I really have a lot of text like this, that's usually not very convenient, because all of that text, if I paste it here, let's now look at, let me say I paste all that in there, and let's look at the code. Well, all of that text is now obviously in the code of this file, right? So that's not convenient. So I'm going to go ahead and before I even, rather than just putting it in here directly, I'm actually going to go insert it as using the strings resource first, rather than putting it in there to start with and extracting it like I did yesterday. So under project, I'm going to go to values, open up strings XML, and you can see that the app name is already here. That will always be here because it needs a string to represent, on the launcher what the name of your app is. So I'm going to add another string, and I'm going to say, well, the name of this, maybe this I'm just going to call lorem ipsum. And then I'll just paste in all the text I have here. Okay, so I've got a bunch of text into this lorem ipsum string.
You made an underscore. Yeah, you did.
Yeah, so it's lorem underscore ipsum. And kind of like we talked about yesterday, we typically separate words with underscores anytime we're dealing with XML or resources there. Okay, so I'm going to put the text in here with that string name, lorem ipsum, and you notice I pushed that down a little bit. It's worth noting, if you hit the backspace here, you see it goes back up a line. So if you want to actually pull it back to the beginning of the line, you have to kind of hold shift and tab at the same time to push it over. All right, so I've got some text in there, right? So I've got my string resource, and that will let me work with this a little bit more conveniently than having it directly in the layout, especially with this amount of text. So I'm going to go back to main, and I'm going to, now that I've created that, I want to actually link up that resource. So if you, I'm going to leave test in there for a minute. If you click the little button next to the text field here, you can see this kind of almost oval. It'll pop up a window here, and that'll give you some suggestions. And in fact, if you look right here, lorem ipsum is already on that list. So I can actually just pick it from here. It will go ahead and fill it in as @string lorem ipsum. Otherwise, I could have just typed that in myself. Yep.
Where was that at?
The little, you can see where my cursor is. It's right next to the box.
Okay.
So that typically will bring up a helpful window like that to give you some more options. So again, you can kind of remember it and know what to type in there, or you can just click that and that'll fill it in. All right, so now we have some lorem ipsum.
So you can just do @string lorem ipsum?
Yep, you could just type in @string lorem ipsum. You don't have to go through this dialog per se. You could just type that in.
I'm getting like red in my configuration file.
Getting red.
Yeah, it's something about a apostrophe in a certain spot. And my strings.xml. It
might be if you have a quote in there, if you got a single quote or a double quote, then you're going to have to escape it. So I can't put, for instance, directly that or this. If I have that in there, that will cause a problem. So you got to make sure that it's like slash there. I'm going to guess, though, you probably have a problem with your start and end tag. So just make sure that your start tag and your end tags are paired up.
No, it was a apostrophe.
Okay. Then you may just need to escape it, is my guess. Okay, so I'm going to now run this on the application. And we're going to run this with the Nexus S.
Are you gonna change the phone in the viewport or in the design,
We could.
or is that a different step?
We can totally do that. I can just go here to preview it that way. So again, if you want to do it there, you go generic 4-inch. So if we're looking at this, right? So now I've got it running on the device. And if you're looking at this as well, you're probably going to notice that there's some problems, right? So if you look at kind of the right, you'll notice that there's a G that's already gone off the screen. Does everybody see that? So
mine rendered all right, but you can't scroll.
Yeah. Well, we haven't put a scroll view in. But you'll notice that at least on my screen, and it is going off the side, right? I've got a number of characters that are going off the edge. And it's also going off the bottom edge, right? So it's going off both the right edge and the bottom edge. So remember when I set up these constraints, notice I only have constraints on the bottom, the top side of this text view and the left side of the text view. Does everybody see that?
Yes.
So effectively it's unconstrained on the right, which is why it's going off the right side of it. So one thing I would need to do, I want to make sure that I've always got constraints to keep things from going off the screen. So one thing I might do to fix this is might just maybe we add a margin on both sides, the top, the bottom, and the left and the right. So now we've got a margin of 8 on all 4 sides. Okay, let me run it again, and just with those additional margins added, we'll notice here. First of all, it's not going off the edge anymore, but it's also kind of not respecting our margins anymore. Does everybody see that? It's going all the way up to the edges. Well, as it turns out, we have still set it to wrap content. So it's still kind of deciding how big it wants to be based on the text. So we need to actually change it to match constraints in both dimensions if we actually want it to obey our margins. Because otherwise it's like, well, I want to be this size and I'm going to ignore what the margins are. So as you're setting margins and things and constraints, you still have to remember to think about, what are the width and the heights. Okay? Everybody with me so far?
So you just put 0 there? Or
I put 0 dp as the width and height. Which, remember, that's equivalent to match constraint. So it's matching the constraint because we have a constraint on the left edge as well as the constraint on the right edge. So this left constraint and that right constraint together kind of limit how big it, or determine how big it can be.
You're not going to put a constraint on the top or bottom, or do you already have?
I already do. I have a constraint on all 4 sides.
Okay.
If I go back to maybe the blueprint view, that may be easier to see in the blueprint view that I've got a constraint on all 4 sides. So that has kept it from going off the screen and ensured that it goes up to 8 dp from the edge. And it should still work if I go into landscape mode. But the text is still being cut off at the bottom because there is not enough space. And so that's why we're going to add a scroll view to make sure that you can see the whole thing. Now, before I add the scroll view, another problem I want to look at and address. You remember that when I put the text in, and you should see this on your end too, you see that I have some break lines in there, right? I remember I generated 5 paragraphs of text. Do you see how they're all running together? There's no space between them.
Yep.
So if you, all this white space that's in here is basically ignored for the most part. So if you want to actually have line breaks, you remember from the lecture, what do we have to introduce to break things down to other lines? What do we use to break lines?
\n.
\n. So what I want to do is for each of these paragraphs after the first, I'm going to put 2 \n. So I'm going to put \n here on the second paragraph, \n on the third paragraph, \n here, \n there. So now that I've added that in, it should actually appear as separate paragraphs, which they're still pretty long. So the end of the first paragraph is already here almost at the bottom of the screen. But at least those paragraphs are now there. Okay? Okay, so let's go back to the activity, right? So we've got sort of a working first draft of this. I want to now add that scroll view in, right? So what can I do? Well, probably the easiest thing for me to do would be to just drag the scroll view onto there, right? So I'm going to drag the scroll view in, and then you'll notice automatically as soon as I pulled the scroll view in, what is inside of it? What is inside of that scroll view right away? Because I didn't get a scroll view by itself.
Linear layout.
So it automatically added a linear layout. Reason being is usually when you're using scroll view, you're going to use a linear layout in combination with it. So I'm going to, now that I've done that, I'm going to actually take the text view and drop it inside of the linear layout. Now, there's a problem, and you'll notice as soon as I dropped it in there, notice how the text view got really, really small, right? It went from being visible and taking up the full screen to being itty bitty tiny.
Can you explain how you got the scroll view there again?
I just dragged it from up here, up in my palette.
Ah, right. Okay.
I just dragged it from my palette down to here underneath constraint layout. So the problem is this control right now, remember, it has constraints on it. Remember, we added constraints to this text view. Well, the problem is those constraints don't get removed when you move it into something smaller. So that's one problem. The other thing that's happening is, well, we've set it to 0 dp, so as soon as I scroll that, take that back up there under linear layout, that kind of takes over. So before you move anything around and put it inside of a scroll view, you want to make sure that you delete or remove the constraints from that item. So we're going to say clear constraints, the selection, so there's no constraints anymore on the text view before I put it up there. Okay, so I removed the constraints and then I dragged it inside of the linear layout. Okay, now if I look at the text view right now, you'll notice that your text view doesn't have, it has a fixed width and height. Does everybody have that? Mine is 304 and 437.
I do not. have
Okay.
any of that. Like as soon as I moved my text view to the linear layout, everything just vanished and I can't even.
So you should still see it on. One of the things you need to remember before you moved it, you want to make sure that you remove the constraints. But you may want to then do an undo, Control Z to move it back out before you drag it in, so you can make sure that you can remove the constraints before. But now that I've got that in there, it may also be that it shows it as 0 dp now. So again, if it's collapsed to nothing, you're probably only going to be able to select it from the component tree. You're probably not going to be able to select it from in here.
Okay, I believe I fixed it now.
Okay, so now that we've fixed that, now that we've got it inside of the linear layout, we do want to change the width and height to be what it really needs to be. So anytime I put something inside of a linear layout, remember it's scrolling vertically, the width of that thing should always be match parent. So if I'm putting something in this kind of orientation, I always need it to be match parent because I want it to be as wide as the layout and the scroll view that it's inside. Okay, so I want it to take up the full width, right?
You have to manually type that in?
No, I just picked it from the dropdown.
I'm not seeing it in my dropdown.
Yeah, my dropdown shows match constraint and wrap content.
Well, that means that you haven't dragged it inside of the linear layout yet.
Oh, I'm seeing it there.
Yeah.
And I cleared the constraints on the text view first.
Well, if you have it down here, you see, if it's down here, I'm not probably gonna see it. Let me go back to.
If you take it out and drag it back in, it'll pop back up.
Yeah. Because
it didn't work for me the first time, and I just had to drag it back in and drag it back out.
Yeah, you may have to do that. So if it doesn't pop, if for whatever reason it still doesn't pop up in that dropdown, you can still type it. You can always type the value out directly. So we want to set the width to match parent because we want it to take up the full width of what it's inside, which in this case the parent is the linear layout. So we want it to set to match parent, and then we want the height of that to be ROP content. So we want it to be as wide as the thing that it's inside of, but as tall as the text is.
Up on top, what do you have for? Where did they go? I thought there was like a distance of 8 dp. That all disappeared. That was the constraint.
That all has disappeared,
right?
Yeah.
Okay,
that all has disappeared right now. We need to put some of that back in.
Okay.
So if we're kind of looking at the from the bottom to the top, so inside text view, you should see match parent as your width, wrap content as your height, and you will notice in the editor that it's actually showing it very tall there. You can see kind of the blue box on my screen, and I can actually use my mouse wheel to scroll up and down inside of it, right? So that's kind of indicating that there's a lot there, even if it's not necessarily visible.
We lost our line breaks too.
You only lost them in your designer. Your designer is showing the slash ends. If you look really close, you'll still see the slash ends there. It just doesn't render them properly.
I want to make sure I didn't mess anything up. I don't have the purple and blue box over mine like that says scrolling text on it, and I think maybe I just
just go up to the eye here and check show system UI.
I fixed it. Sorry.
Yep, no problem. So this should be match parent and wrap content. We go up a step to linear layout. Should be the same thing, match parent and wrap content. And then up at the scroll view is the one we still need to fix. So scroll view is the one that's actually directly inside of the constraint layout. Can everybody see that? So,
yes.
Because it's only that one that is really is conceptually basically inside of the constraint layout. It's a direct child of it. Versus the linear layout is a child of the scroll view. The text view is a child of the linear layout. So that's where they're a little bit different. But with the constraint layout, that's where we need to then actually, the scroll view, we actually need to find some constraints. So what I'm going to do in there is I'm going to actually put the margins back in on that.
So you can't add constraints once the text view is in the linear layout?
The constraints, they're basically in relationship to the parent, right? So you're defining constraints on the text view, but that's really not being applied by the text view. Those constraints are actually being applied by the thing they're inside, the view group they're inside, which has to be constraint layout. So because the text view is inside of a linear layout, you can't define constraints on the text view. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
The layout engine that you put the view in, it has a major effect on how you can design it. So now that I've got the scroll view here, I need to go back and kind of change a few things. So I've got I went ahead and added a constraint on all four sides. It looks like it started it out as 0. I want to make sure that I set the width and height of the scroll view to match match constraint, or 0 dp here, to make sure it fits into everything. Now, if I were to look at this kind of two different ways, let's say I go back to setting these all to 8, right? So now I've got a scroll view, and you'll notice if I click things in the designer, it always takes me to the text view. It actually bypasses both of those two things. I can't click anywhere in here and get to the scroll view in the linear layout. I actually need to pick those from the component tree over here. If I have an 8 margin there, let's see what that looks like in the app. So it works. There's some space between the edge and the text. The problem is this is actually a case where I probably don't want the margin where it is. So it doesn't actually make a lot of sense for the margin to be between the scroll view and the edge of the screen. Where I'd actually like my margin to be is on the text view itself. Does that make sense?
Hey, Mr. Smith.
Yep.
Whenever I open it up in the emulator, when I use my scroll wheel, it immediately just moves it to the bottom or the top. Is that normal?
I think that's a bug. It looks like I'm seeing the same behavior as well. When I use my scroll wheel, I saw some of that too. Yeah. I think that's a bug in the emulator side.
Because I can hold my mouse and drag it, but I can't use my scroll wheel, or it freaks out.
Yeah. So I went down here, there. So I'm seeing the same behavior.
Okay.
That's just a bug in the emulator.
All right, I'm just making sure.
Yeah, that's definitely not something we did. If you were to use this on an actual device, I don't think you'd see that same behavior. That being said, most devices don't have scroll wheels.
They're drag
devices. Yeah, so the touch thing is really usually how I test that to emulate, what I would actually be doing, which I'm kind of doing the same kind of touch behavior with my mouse. You can technically hook up a Bluetooth mouse and to a phone or a tablet, and that way you can actually have a scroll view. But most people don't obviously use a scroll wheel with their physical tablet. So if it is an issue, then that'd be a different story. Okay. So what I was trying to say is I want to actually move where the margin is. So I'm actually going to go back to the scroll view and set all of these back to 0. Okay. So it's actually going to be nestled up all the way to the edge, which is usually what I want. I usually want to have my scroll view all the way to the edge of the screen. Okay. Does everybody have that? Everybody in the same place where I am?
I'm still trying to figure out why my thing doesn't want to scroll.
Okay. Is it not scrolling here?
Yeah, it's not scrolling.
Okay.
Oh, no.
So you have to make sure that all of your widths and heights are correct. Okay. So on the scroll view, what's my width and height? 0 and 0, right?
I had a match parent, but yeah, 0 and 0 now.
Okay. It needs to be 0 and 0. And then this would need to be match parent and wrap content. And then same with the text view, match parent and wrap content. If you screw one of those up, it won't work.
Oh, there it goes now. Okay.
So, for instance, if I set this to match parent down here, now I've actually said that the text view should be the same height of what it's in. As it turns out, well, I guess the scrolling is working there. Let me go back to here.
Your text view is in your text view is in wrap content.
Yeah.
That's what it.
Yeah. So that's what I want. So anyway, I remove the margin on the outside. I want to actually get it into the inside. So actually, to get it where I want, the trick is I can't use constraints here because first of all, this is not in a constraint layout anymore, and margin actually would not be what I would want here. What you actually want now, it would be padding. So I want to go down to padding and set the padding, let's say, to 8 dp. And you'll notice I'm doing padding here up at the top. I'm not setting on a per side basis. I'm giving it a padding of 8 on all sides. So that will then get it effectively, the spacing is kind of inside of the scroll view, outside of the scroll view. And you'll remember kind of when we were working with CSS and such in the browser, we've got this idea of a box model, and you have this idea of margin versus padding. You may remember that margin is always outside of the control. Padding is always inside the control. And that's the same difference here. Margin is outside of the view, and padding is inside the view. Cool? Is everybody with me so far?
So, I'm sorry.
Yep.
So we put padding on the text, and then we just set the scroll view to 0?
Yep.
Okay.
So we'll put padding on the text view, but we won't put we won't actually put any margin on the scroll view on the outside. So that'll actually give us the kind of behavior that we want. Which means that, for instance, as you scroll, you can kind of see where the scroll bar is appearing. The scroll bar is appearing all the way on the right edge of my screen, which is what the expected user behavior is. Okay. So let's start to actually put in the text and the layout that we're actually going for with this lab. Now that we've kind of understand how to get a scroll view that actually works and to get the content in there, we can start to actually build out the application that we're going for. All right, so let me go down to one of these
I have a
elements.
question real fast.
Yep.
So you put the padding on the text view?
Yes. Padding's on the text
Okay,
view.
that's where I went wrong. Give me a second.
Yeah, padding's on the text view.
Yeah, I'm still looking at my scroll view here too. Everything else works, but every time I change my layout height to 0 dp, it just all disappears.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's just getting pulled up all the way to the top until I take it off and put it back to wrap content.
So I'm going to pull up my code here, and I'll actually just throw this in here so you can see it. So that's all the code that I have there right now. And what you have should be exactly identical to that at this point.
All right, I fixed my bug.
Okay. So what's shown here on the right is what we're kind of going for. I'm gonna modify this a little bit, but no, actually no, we'll keep that as is. So here we've got kind of a few things. So we've got a heading here up at the top, and so that we want that heading to be right below scrolling text here, and that will stay fixed. That won't scroll as we go up and down. But this other, we can see the text, the article text, and the subheading. Both of those things we want to scroll as we do the scroll. Okay, so these two things are going to scroll together. That thing's going to be separate. Does everybody see that? Now, they're doing this with a relative layout. We're going to do this with a constraint layout, but with a, similar structure. All right. So if I want to get to this layout, where should we start? What component should we put in first? So to get from here to there.
Heading and then a scroll view.
Okay. So we've got a scroll view already. Let's go ahead and put that heading in. So that heading is going to be a text view. So I'm going to drag that in. I'm going to put it right here in the constraint layout. And then the next thing I want to do is I want to actually connect up my constraints. So I'm going to connect a constraint up here and connect a constraint up there. And actually in this case, I'm going to go back to 0 because I actually want both of those and on the right. So I've got a constraint to the top, the left, and the right. So we'll fit in there because I want it to be the full width, and I want it to be anchored to the top. So do make sure, sometimes, especially because the scroll view is right here, it might have anchored it to the scroll view. So you want to make sure that all three of these, start and top, all of those anchors are listed as parent. Okay, so make sure all of these three anchors are listed as parent after you've added that in there. The scroll view, I actually need to change the top constraint now to point the top of the scroll view to the bottom of that text view, bottom of that header. Go back to blueprint view. Maybe I'll just stay on design. Okay. And then the next thing I want to do, you kind of notice here that heading's taking up the full width. What do I need to change here to make the heading take up that full width?
I think that's wrap content, yeah?
Okay. It's already at wrap content.
0 then?
The width would be matched constraint.
Yeah. Yep, that's what I need to do. So here I'm still going to keep these actually at 0. The reason being is, as you kind of can see in the preview here, you see it's got a background. So if I were to put margins outside of it, that background would not extend all the way to the edge. So just like I did with the other one, rather than using margin there, I'm actually going to use a padding of 8 dp to bring it in a little bit.
Mr. Smith, I got a problem. This new text view, I can't find it. It's disappeared on the page. I can click on it in the constraint layout, but I'm not able to add constraints to it on the side. You said not to touch the pluses, and I can't do anything else.
Okay. You may need to go back to a width of, say, 100 and 100, so you can see it here, the width and height. I would select it in the component tree and set it to 100 and 100. If you've set it to 0 but the constraints are not set up, that's where it's going to collapse to not visible. So for instance, the only reason that it's visible here is because I have a constraint already on both the left and the right.
I tried that. I still can't see it. It was there, and I tried to anchor it to something, and then it just disappeared.
Okay. It might be anchored to the scroll view.
All right, I'll just delete it again. Another thing, too, is I can't render my device anymore, the virtual device. Some error happened, it was like 5 minutes ago.
Yeah.
What do you think that might be?
I would first check if there's anything red here.
Okay.
If there's any red exclamation marks, then you need to fix the red exclamation marks.
No. Oh. All right, I'll just carry on, try to fix it later.
It could also be that there could be an error in your strings. If there's an error in your strings, then it can't build the project at all, and that would break the whole thing. Okay. So you might check strings.xml as the other place you would check.
Okay, and then one more question before you go. Yep. How did you get it to drop down?
How did I get it to drop down? So the way I did that is I changed the top constraint. The top constraint was pointed to the top, pointed to parent. So I changed this constraint. It was pointed up here. I pointed it down to the bottom of the heading. So it's now anchored to the bottom of the heading instead of anchored to the top of the screen. Okay. I'm going to change the ID of the one on the top. And let's say this one is heading text. I'm going to do the refactor. So we've got heading text there. This would be like the text view down here would be body text. So I've got a heading text, I've got a body text, and so those are good so far. What am I still missing as far as what we want in here?
You're missing a subheading.
Okay, missing the subheading. So what kind of control do I want to use there?
Text view.
Okay, text view, and I want to drag that to
The linear layout.
into the linear layout. Okay, so I'm going to drag that right into linear layout. Thing to remember with linear layout doesn't use constraints. It just puts things in the order that they appear. So actually I drop it in there and it kind of works already. So the only things I need to change then with this one, I want to first of all change the ID. This is going to be subheading text. And in there, I'm going to change the actual text of it to say subheading. Same way up here, I'm going to change that text to say heading. Okay. So subheading, I also need to give it some margin so that because right now it's appearing all the way on the left. So I'm going to go down and give that padding of 8 dp just like the others. So you should have a padding of 8 dp on all 3 of your text views. So far, so good. Any questions?
I'm still stuck on this text view at the top here, trying to get it out on my 8th one, trying to figure it out.
So what's happening?
I'm just not understanding why my heading isn't staying there.
Okay. Well, first question, in the component tree, is your component tree organized the same way as mine? Just check that first.
So I'm still here on after adding the original text view. Right now it's constraint layout, text view, scroll view, linear layout, and then text view again.
Right. And is it in the same hierarchy? So scroll view is next to at the same level as heading?
Yes.
Okay. So the next thing to check then is make sure your constraints are right. So the constraints that I have on my heading, notice on the heading I have 3 constraints. I don't have 4 constraints, I have 3. So the bottom is not constrained.
That's where I'm stuck. I don't know how to put the constraints on. I don't see any other way to do it other than hit the plus sign.
Okay, well then hit the plus sign.
Oh, I thought we weren't supposed to do that.
I said in general you want to try and avoid it, but if you can't see it, then try it. You want to make sure that it anchors it to parent though, because the odds are if you hit plus, it's probably going to anchor it to something else. So hit the plus. If it anchors it to parent, then you're good.
How do you change it? Is that in the XML if it does the wrong thing?
If it does the wrong thing, I usually use the arrows. You can change it in the XML, but you have to kind of have an understanding of what those properties should be. So, for instance, if I look at here, you see the specific property is layout constraint end to end of parent, constraint start end of parent. So you could actually go in there and type out that. Versus like this one, you can see the scroll view is anchored to the top of the scroll view is anchored to the bottom of heading text. So there's an ID there instead of parent. So yeah, you can actually change it through the code view if you need to go do that.
Okay. I think I have it right, but I am not seeing any text on the screen.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's not a good sign. Are you in the blueprint view or are you in the design view?
Design.
Okay.
With the UI on there.
Okay. Because blueprint, you can see looks a little bit different. Sometimes you don't see all the text and such. Okay.
Layout width is, what is that supposed to be?
So the layout width.
Oh, I see it. 0 DP. Okay.
Yeah. So 0 DP up on the top one, up on the heading.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on. It overwrites what I type in there. I type in 0 and it overwrites it with match parent.
That would indicate to me that it's probably in the wrong place. So which thing are you trying to change the width on?
The heading text.
The heading text. Okay. What is the heading text inside of?
It's inside constraint layout at the same level as scroll view.
Okay. So can you go look at the XML and look if that's actually true? Does it actually look the same way as it looks like here on my screen?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're saying you type in 0 DP and it changes it to match parent.
Yeah. I don't know if it's better to handle it like during a break or something, or just, if there's any value added by sharing the class.
I would try just changing this to 0 DP in the code. I would just try using the code viewer then and mess around with there.
Okay.
Okay. So this is kind of the layout, the start of the layout we're trying to get to. One of the things you'll notice with the heading, you can see that first of all, it's kind of in the background is in blue and the text is kind of bolded. Okay. So I want to set those things. So let's say we want to give that a background. And we kind of went over this yesterday. So I want to give that a background. And so I'm going to go down to background. I'm going to do this little ellipse symbol right next to it to get this pop up. And then you'll notice initially when it pops in, it's actually popping into this tab drawable. So initially it's suggesting me images. I actually want to go over to the color tab so I can pick a color. Now I'm going to pick, knowing that this is, I think that's purple 500, I'm going to pick here purple 700, so it'll be a little bit darker and contrast there. So you can see now that I picked it as purple 700, you can kind of see the separation, right? So I typically want to use kind of a darker shade there to contrast and see that there's a split. Okay, so we've got that, and you'll notice that now that I've changed it to a darker purple, the text is really hard to read, right? So I probably want to go then also and change the text color. So if I go back up to the common attributes, I'll see that there's a text color there. I'm going to again go into this pop-up, and I'm going to pick white from the available colors. So now I've got a text color of white and a background of purple 700. So we've got kind of that sort of separation there. Next up would be I want to change the size of the text. And in one option I have there, I could say, well, let's change the size of that to 20 SP or whatever we want to set it to. What I'm going to do instead, we kind of mentioned in the slides that there's other thing called text appearance. So I want this to kind of have the styling of basically an H1. So in order to give it that H1 styling, I'm going to go into text appearance and change it to, I think it's display, not display 1, large. Yeah, so I'm going to set that to large as app-compat large. And then I would say, similarly, kind of with the subheading, I'm going to go to the subheading and give it a text appearance of medium. So that'll kind of give it that behavior of like an H1 and an H2. So I'm using large text appearance and medium text appearance. And then finally for the actual text, I would go pick, in terms of the text appearance there, I might go pick body 1 because it's kind of the body text.
Yeah, Mr. Smith, I don't know if I messed something up or where I'm at, because my hierarchy, everything is the exact same as yours, to where you got to all the code is the exact same, and these constraints just aren't wanting to push it. So
okay, well let's try to troubleshoot when we're done with the example here, and we can troubleshoot after. It's probably pretty simple. It's just really hard for me to know without actually looking at.
That's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking it's a constraint that's just not.
Yeah.
I'm running into a problem where I changed the text appearance for the heading, but it didn't actually increase the size.
Okay. So one of the things you have to make sure is that you don't have a text size set here. If I have a text size set, so say I set it to 14 SP, the text size will override the text appearance.
Gotcha.
So you got to make sure that you don't have a text size there set. You just want to set the text appearance.
Okay.
So typically that text appearance comes with a few things like the size set. In this case, I also know that I want to set that as bold. So I'm going to go ahead and set that as well. So I'm going to leave the font size unset, but I will set it to bold for both the heading and the subheading. So they're now bolded text. Okay. So far we're mostly there. And if I were to run the application, if you had all your ducks in the row, which again I need to I'll follow up with you, Zach and Paul, and see where you're landing. But we should see something like this. Does that kind of conceptually make sense so far?
Yeah.
So that's where we're kind of going. Now, one thing I notice here, I probably want this this heading here to kind of align with the text right above it, because I do notice that this is a little bit farther over left than that. That's just a matter of kind of trial and error to get there. The usual way I do that is I just kind of double it until I get to the right place. So I'm going to go down to, I'm going to select heading, and I'm going to go down to padding. And so when I go to padding, I'm going to change this, and you'll notice if I do the drop down here, I can actually change the padding on different sides. So in this case, I don't want to change the padding on all sides to be bigger, because as I do that, this gets much taller, and I don't really want it to get any taller than it already is. So instead of changing the padding on all sides, I'm going to actually just go change the padding on the start. So padding start is going to be maybe 16 dp, and that looks like it's more aligned there. So moving that heading over to 16 dp. So now you'll kind of see with the padding, I've got padding and padding start set. So it's very similar to kind of how you think about CSS there. Now, in general, some places in the UI, you'll see things like this. There's a padding left and there's a padding start, or there's a padding right and there's a padding end. Generally speaking, you want to use start and end over left and right, because left and right is always left and right, and doesn't work the right way for, say, left to right languages such as Hebrew or Japanese. So you want to usually use the start and the end over left and right. Cool? Because that'll cover you for left to right languages.
Okay, so don't use left and right.
Don't use left and right. Always use start and end. Yeah.
Okay.
Anytime you're setting stuff in Android, never use left and right. Always use start and end.
Can start and end also be a different context, top and bottom? You know, like if you're
No.
say like stacking
No.
text as vertical. Okay.
Start and end are always equate to either left or right. Top and bottom is always top and bottom. So it's not like with Flexbox, where Flexbox is sometimes left to right and sometimes top up to down based on the orientation of the Flexbox. It's always start and end is always left and right. Oftentimes I'll kind of keep those paired. So if I set the padding start, though, I'll usually set the padding end to the same number. And that kind of just makes things symmetrical, because that can be an issue as your text gets longer. If I had a longer title, then I might need to make sure that the padding on the end is the same as the padding on the start. So I'm usually going to set those both to the same number. And I probably want to go down to, I think I'm going to go down to the subheading and do the same thing. So it's lined up as well. So on the subheading, I'm going to give it 16 dp on the start and 16 dp on the end. So all three of those should now be lined up horizontally. So that's how you can kind of start to play around with these text views and see where that fits in. I think the last thing that we need to do here is actually put an actual article in here, okay? And to put that article in, there's really one thing I want to do first, which is to extract the strings. So when I put this in, you see I put heading and I put subheading, but I typed those in literally. I haven't extracted those string resources yet. So before we actually put the real content in there, I want to extract both of those. So I'm going to go to the heading, and I'm going to go Alt-Enter, and we're going to extract that string resource as heading text. And same with the subheading, I'm going to extract Alt-Enter and extract that as subheading text.
How did you get that extract thing? Is that Alt-Enter?
Alt-Enter.
Highlight the text that's in between the quotes and Alt-Enter.
Yep, highlight the text, Alt-Enter. That's all you got to do to extract the string resource.
Okay. How far along are we in this exercise? I was just thinking maybe we could take a break, and during that time we can get Zach and I caught up, because I'm falling behind.
We're almost done.
Okay. All right.
We're almost done. So the only thing that we haven't done is actually change and put the real text in there. So and then mark this. Remember, I talked about, you want to say auto link, so your links work. So what's left is now you should have a few entries in here. You should have heading. You should have heading text. You have subheading text. You have lorem ipsum. What I want you to do is add another one. So we're going to add another one in here, call it body text. And then I'm going to switch in my layout. Rather than using the lorem ipsum, it's going to use body text. So it should look something like this now.
Are you going to put the lorem ipsum in the body?
What I want you to now do is, if you're at the same point as this, I want you to now go find an article online and that's got a heading and it's got a subheading, got body, and bring that in, right? So find an article that's available online and bring that into this application now. Doesn't need to be the full article. Just bring in maybe a few, maybe 3 paragraphs or 4 paragraphs, just enough to get the scroll bar to show up. So that's what I want you to do now, is to go find that. Cool.
So it doesn't matter what type of article?
Doesn't matter what kind of article it is. So find one, fill in the heading, fill in the subheading, fill in the body. And then you'll kind of need to figure out how to put in, some bold tags, put in some italic tags, put in at least one of those places I would expect to see a link. That's basically it. Other than that, we're basically set here. There is no Java code that we need to write to implement this application. So we're just dealing with layouts today.
This reminds me of doing float with HTML. I like it about as much.
Well, so I would, the way I would, layouts have changed a lot over the years. The way we do layouts and such in Android. I would say that, kind of when I learned how to do things, maybe five plus years ago, the only two things we had was relative layout and linear layout. I would compare linear layout kind of to like, just using your divs and your blocks and your BRs and your paragraphs, right? The stuff you started with is basically linear layout. And then you step up a level, and relative layout is actually kind of like floats. In reality, constraints layouts, once you get used to it, I think it will become much more intuitive, because constraint layout is actually much more like Flexbox, and it has the same kind of amount of power once you learn how to use it. So anyway, I would compare constraint layout more to Flex. And relative more to floats. But all right, so Paul, can you share your screen? Let's see what you got.
Yeah,
so we can figure it out.
Okay. Okay. So here, can you see?
I'm still pulling it up here. Okay, I can see your screen now.
Okay. Yeah. So here it is over on the left. And what do I have? Let's see. I got it highlighted.
What I see, first of all, is that you're I would say that your scroll view probably is the first thing to fix. So go to your scroll view. And so one of the things that I see is that's the top of the scroll view is still anchored to the top of the screen. So that's one thing. But let's go back to the heading one second. Let's see if I can see something there.
It's almost like it's on the left of it rather than on top of it.
Do me a favor here and go ahead and hit run on your application. Sometimes just pushing run will trigger it to kind of change a few things. Okay, that's cool. All right, so let's go back to the code now. So click on heading text again. Get it selected. So it looks almost like it's anchored over there on the left-hand side, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would, let's say, maybe delete the right constraint on it. Yep. And now change the width of it to, say, 200 dp. And try to anchor it to the right side of the screen.
Like that?
Okay. That's so far so good. So far so good. All right, so let's change the width of it now to be 0 again. Okay, so it's fixed. It's fixed.
Sort of. It's like they're not
so
they're jumbled over each other.
That's where you want it to be. So you just want to take the scroll view now, go to the scroll view, and yes, you can see the scroll view is kind of overlapping it. You just need to change the top of the scroll view to point to the bottom of the heading. But do it with the designer. So get the in the view. in the view. Go find the arrow. Yep. Take that. Take a little circle. And move it to the bottom of there. Yeah. So now it should be anchored underneath.
It's a little tiny. We increased the font size and did all that. I got to do all that yet.
Yeah. So I changed the text appearance for that to large and left the font size alone.
Text appearance to this large?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. It's all in the directions, right?
Yeah, it's pretty much all in the directions.
What was my problem?
I think you're. I'm not entirely clear, but I think that it was a graphical glitch with the editor. Honestly, I think it was I think you got into a glitch with the editor. So that's where, the way we got out of it, we took off the right constraint and then set it to our own width. So that kind of got it out of the hole of thinking that it is 0 pixels wide.
Okay, all right. I'm gonna watch Zach's here to see if there's anything that I missed or a different problem, because I'm almost glad to have these. They tend to happen when I'm working on homework at say like midnight, not when I got available.
Yeah, I know.
All right, so let's look at what you have. So I would do the same. I would do the same twiddle for. Oh, I see part of your problem, Zach. Do you see you have a bottom constraint on your heading?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's constrained to both the top of the view and the bottom of the scroll view, which is not what you want.
Which would be that tiny little area there.
Right. So what you actually want to do is, rather than constraining the bottom of the heading to the scroll view, you do it the other way around. So go to the select the scroll view, and anchor the scroll view to the bottom of the heading. So you actually have to change the arrow. You have to move the arrow around. So go find that circle, right, and anchor it to the bottom of the heading. There it goes. Now the problem you're still seeing is that you see your height. What is the height of your scroll view?
435, and it should be wrap content, shouldn't it?
It should be match constraint, actually.
Oh, okay, match constraint.
Yeah, and that'll shrink it in to be there. Oh, almost.
Yeah.
The problem is that your bottom constraint, I think, is the problem. So go back to, say, 100 dp for the height. And let's remove the bottom constraint on there. Oh, you got to make sure you have the scroll view selected. Okay. So the bottom of that, remove that constraint and re-add it, and try to point it to the bottom of the view. Oh, I see your problem. Go up to constraint layout, because in here you changed the wrong height of something. That still needs to be match parent. Yeah.
Okay, I knew it was probably something small like that.
Yeah. So let's go to scroll view. There it goes. Yeah. So now you should be able to go back to a height of 0 dp. Yeah, you have to be kind of careful where you set the widths and the heights, as far as, you have to look at what you're actually selecting when you do it.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so then you just want to change that heading to be the full width. So you need to give it a right constraint, right? So anchor it to the right edge of the screen. And then you can set it to, 0 dp, which it already is.
Yeah.
So now all of your elements should be in the right place. You just need to add your subheading and do some more styling with it.
Okay. Awesome.
The padding on the scroll is it's not on the scroll. It's on
each of the text views.
Yeah, the text views have the padding of 8 on the right side.
Yeah.
It's going to be recorded and put up, correct?
Yeah, I'll record. I'll put the recording up.
Did you say we need like a link or something to the website, or what kind of?
A link to the yes, I would like whatever article you put in should have a link. So like you'll put put the link in there, be like HTTP, blah 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 blah, and then what you'll want to do is then go change on the body text. You want to set that auto link to web.
So you want the link in the body?
Yes, the link should be in the body.
Is the auto web thing in the slides? I guess.
Yeah, it's in the slides. It's actually really easy to set. If you go, it's literally just that. You just say auto link web. So if you type in here on this text view, I can do it through the UI or I can do it through the text here in the code. I would just say auto link and say there's all the options. So I'm going to set it to web. So that would convert any URLs that it sees automatically into links.
If you go to task, or if you go to number 5, task 3, and go to 3.1, it gives you an entire thing on it, Corey.
Yeah.
Got it. Thanks.
Yeah. And the challenge that they ask you is actually pretty simple. All they ask you to do for the challenge, once you've kind of got the article in, is to just add a button to the end of the scroll view. So you're going to add an add comment view, add comment button. So
At the end of it?
That's the end of it.
No, I said at the end of it, yeah.
Yeah, at the end of it, but it needs to scroll with the scroll view. So it'll be down at the bottom, but it shouldn't be visible until you scroll down to it. Check all that in.
And you just want to add the challenge to this one that we're working on right now?
Yep, just add it to the same project. Don't need to create a separate project for this challenge.
Did I see in the text that you put the /n at the beginning of the paragraph or at the end of the one?
I put it at the beginning of the paragraph.
Starting with the second one.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Do we just work on this until 4:30? This is kind of like our lab time to fiddle with it.
Yeah. So if this is our lab time, if you get done with it, then go on and maybe start reading up on 1.4 for tomorrow. Is what I'd say.
Okay. Awesome. All right.
If you get it done early, that's all I would ask you to do is just go start on 1.4.
Okay.
Any questions? Anybody still having difficulties with that lab?
I'm just getting like problems.
Okay.
I'm just getting problems with like the way that it's the articles are like unescaped apostrophe.
Yeah, there's a lot of scaping you'll need to do if you bring something in. One of the things I would recommend is make sure that when you bring the article in, don't copy the HTML from the article, just copy like the text that you see. So like if I was going to copy this, I would copy the text this way and then put a styling in. I wouldn't go like inspect and try to copy the HTML.
Oh, why I did exactly like I just copied and pasted the
Yeah.
parts and it's still just
Yeah. There's still
dying.
probably stuff that you're going to have to fix. Yeah. And yeah, because oftentimes you'll find quotes, single quotes, and double quotes, and have to go to escape those. No, there's not a way to auto import text for that. The good news is when we pull, if we were to say, for instance, pull this from a database, oftentimes the escaping isn't necessary. It's only really necessary because we're pulling it from strings.xml, which has kind of a quirky syntax. So if this was actually in a database table, it would actually be easier. And that's part of why there's not really an option to escape it, because people usually end up pulling it from the internet or a database, and that kind of then isn't as much of a problem.
Is there a way to format the text so it doesn't run all the way to the page? Say it fits within that, I guess that's like 80 characters limit.
I do believe there is. I think if you go to view, it would be a text wrapping. Let me just look it up real quick. But I know there's an option for it. Android Studio text wrap. So. Okay, so it'd be view, and they say active editor, soft wrap. There you go.
Oh, all right. Awesome. And how many paragraphs? You just want us to do 5, or it doesn't matter?
Yeah. Probably about 5. That should be enough to get it to scroll on the Nexus S, for sure. Just basically needs to be like at least a screen and a half of text.
Do you want to check them when we push it, or?
Yeah, I can check them.
Because I just pushed mine.
Okay. Let me make sure let me get all the repos pulled down. I'll actually stop my